Imagine dedicating your entire life to one impossible dream, music, and refusing to compromise, even when the world turns against you. That is the extraordinary journey at the heart of The Yellow Tie, a powerful new biographical drama that brings the remarkable life of legendary Romanian conductor Sergiu Celibidache to the big screen. Directed by Serge Ioan Celibidachi, The Yellow Tie is not simply a movie about classical music. It is a story about ambition, sacrifice, family, rejection, loneliness, passion, and the relentless pursuit of artistic truth. And the deeper you go into Celibidache's life, the more fascinating and heartbreaking it becomes. The film follows Sergiu from his childhood in Romania, where he grows up under the strict authority of his father, to his decision to leave home and chase his dream of becoming a musician. His journey takes him through wartime Germany, poverty, homelessness, prejudice, and enormous professional uncertainty. But Sergiu refuses to give up. Even when survival itself becomes a challenge, he continues to believe that music can become something greater than entertainment. For him, conducting isn't simply about keeping an orchestra in time. It's about emotion, truth, connection, and creating something that can move the human soul. And this is where the movie becomes especially interesting. The story begins in Romania, where a young boy named Sergiu Celibidache grows up in a strict household. From an early age, Sergiu is intelligent, curious, and deeply fascinated by music. But his father, Demosthene, is a powerful and disciplinarian man who expects his son to follow a respectable and predictable path. But for Sergiu, ordinary life is never enough. He feels an almost impossible pull toward music. His father doesn't understand this obsession. To him, music is not a secure future. He wants Sergiu to become someone respectable, someone who follows the rules. But Sergiu has already discovered something that cannot be taken away from him: a dream. As the years pass, the conflict between father and son becomes stronger. Sergiu increasingly feels trapped inside a life designed by someone else. Eventually, he makes a decision that changes everything. He leaves home. He chooses uncertainty over security and begins pursuing music with complete determination. But the world waiting for him is far from welcoming. Sergiu arrives in Germany during an extremely difficult period in European history. The Second World War has created fear, destruction, poverty, and chaos across the continent. For a young Romanian musician trying to build a career, survival itself becomes a challenge. There are moments when Sergiu struggles simply to get through the day. He faces poverty, isolation, prejudice, and uncertainty about his future. But instead of abandoning his dream, he becomes even more determined. He studies relentlessly, absorbs everything he can about music, and develops a philosophy that will eventually make him one of the most unusual conductors of his generation. Sergiu doesn't believe music should simply be performed mechanically. He believes the conductor must discover the soul inside the composition. Every pause matters, every silence matters, every movement matters. And when the music finally begins, the orchestra must become something greater than a collection of individual musicians. It must become one living organism. This philosophy makes Sergiu brilliant, but it also makes him difficult. He refuses to compromise simply to please people. He challenges established traditions. He argues with musicians. He rejects commercial expectations. And he develops a reputation as a man who would rather lose an opportunity than sacrifice his artistic principles. Then comes the opportunity that could change his life forever. Sergiu is given the chance to conduct the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. For a young musician, this is an extraordinary achievement. Suddenly, the man who once struggled to survive is standing in front of one of the world's greatest orchestras. But Sergiu doesn't behave like someone who has finally achieved everything he wanted. Instead, he demands more. More from himself, more from the orchestra, more from the music. His performances attract enormous attention. Some people see a genius, others see an arrogant and impossible man. And this becomes one of the central conflicts of Sergiu's life. Can an artist remain true to himself without destroying the relationships around him? Sergiu's obsession with music affects his personal life as well. His relationship with Ioana becomes an important part of his journey. She sees the man behind the conductor, the passionate, complicated, sometimes emotionally distant human being. But loving someone completely devoted to their art is not easy. Sergiu's career demands enormous sacrifices, and the people closest to him sometimes pay the price. Meanwhile, his relationship with his father remains one of the deepest emotional wounds in his life. No matter how successful Sergiu becomes, there is still a part of him that remembers the strict father who once failed to understand his dream. Fame doesn't erase childhood pain. Success doesn't automatically heal old wounds. And as Sergiu grows older, he begins to understand that becoming a great artist does not necessarily mean becoming emotionally free. The film then moves through different stages of his extraordinary career. Sergiu conducts, he travels, he teaches, he argues, he inspires, he frustrates people. And again, he refuses to become the kind of conductor the industry wants him to be. Commercial success doesn't interest him in the same way artistic truth does. He becomes famous for demanding something deeper from music. For Sergiu, a performance isn't about showing off. It isn't about speed. It isn't even simply about technical perfection. It's about discovering what the composer truly intended and allowing the music to breathe. This philosophy becomes almost an obsession, and the older Sergiu becomes, the more intense that obsession appears. John Malkovich portrays this later version of Sergiu as a man who has accumulated decades of victories, disappointments, arguments, memories, and regrets. He doesn't need to shout to dominate a room. His presence alone is enough. When he stands in front of an orchestra, everyone watches. One movement of his hand can change the entire atmosphere. One expression can communicate anger, disappointment, or inspiration. But behind that powerful public image is an aging man looking back at his life. And this is where the movie becomes increasingly emotional. Because Sergiu begins to confront something that cannot be controlled with a conductor's baton: his past. He remembers his childhood, his father, his decision to leave, the struggles he experienced, the people he loved, the opportunities he lost, and the price he paid for becoming the artist he wanted to be. The film suggests that perhaps Sergiu's greatest battle was never against other conductors or critics. It was against the fear that the people he loved might never truly understand him. Then comes one of the story's most touching moments. The older Sergiu begins going through a gift connected to his father. At first, it seems like an ordinary object from the past, but as he looks through it, the emotional meaning becomes clear. For years, Sergiu believed that his father never truly understood or appreciated the path he had chosen. But now, through this final discovery, Sergiu realizes something deeply personal. His father may have understood more than he ever knew. The realization hits him with tremendous emotional force. All those years of anger, distance, disappointment, and longing suddenly take on a different meaning. Sergiu has spent his entire life searching for recognition, and in the final chapter of his journey, he discovers that perhaps the persons whose approval he wanted most had been watching him all along. It's a quiet moment. There is no giant speech, no dramatic action sequence, just an old man confronting a lifetime of memories. And somehow that makes it even more powerful. Because The Yellow Tie isn't ultimately a story about becoming famous, it's about becoming yourself. Sergiu Celibidache spends decades fighting against convention, commercialism, prejudice, and expectations. He becomes one of the most distinctive conductors of his era. But the greatest achievement of his life may not be the fame. It may be that he never abandoned the dream of the young boy who once left Romania believing that music could give his life meaning. The final chapters bring together the different versions of Sergiu we've seen throughout the film: the frightened young man, the ambitious musician, the controversial conductor, the husband, the father, and finally the elderly artist looking back at everything. And the message becomes clear. Sometimes following your dream means losing the approval of others. Sometimes greatness comes with loneliness. Sometimes the people who love you may not understand your choices. And sometimes, after spending an entire lifetime searching for acceptance, you discover that what you really wanted wasn't fame at all. You simply wanted someone to say, "I understand you." That is what makes The Yellow Tie more than a classical music biopic. It is a deeply human story about ambition, family, sacrifice, artistic freedom, and the desire to be understood. And when the music rises during the final moments, Sergiu's entire life seems to come together, not as a perfect story, but as a complicated one. A life filled with victories and failures, love and loneliness, pride and regret. But above everything else, a life lived according to his own rhythm. And perhaps that is the real meaning behind The Yellow Tie. You don't have to become what the world expects you to become. You don't have to sacrifice your deepest passion simply because other people don't understand it. But if you choose your own path, you must also accept the price that comes with it. Sergiu Celibidache did exactly that. He fought for his music, he fought for his identity, and ultimately he spent his entire life searching for something much more difficult than success: truth. That is the extraordinary story of The Yellow Tie. Ben Schnetzer takes on the role of the younger Sergiu, while Ian Horrocks portrays him during his adolescence. Together, their performances create a convincing progression of a young dreamer slowly becoming one of the most uncompromising musical minds of his generation. But then, we get John Malkovich as the older Sergiu, and this is where the film truly finds another level. Malkovich brings an incredible intensity to the character. His Sergiu can appear calm and controlled one moment, then suddenly reveal the volcanic passion underneath. There is a sense that every movement, every word, and every silence carries years of experience. He doesn't portray Sergiu as a perfect genius. He portrays him as a human being, a man who achieved extraordinary things, but who also carried emotional wounds, complicated relationships, and the consequences of his own choices. And one of the most important relationships in the story is his relationship with his father, Demosthenes Sergiu, played by Sean Bean. Their relationship gives the movie an emotional foundation. Beneath all the fame and musical brilliance is a son who desperately wants recognition and acceptance from someone whose approval matters deeply to him. That's something many viewers may connect with, because sometimes the hardest battle isn't against an audience, critics, competitors, or the world. Sometimes it's against the need to be accepted by the people closest to us. The film also explores Sergiu's relationship with Ioana, portrayed by Kate Phillips in her younger years, and Miranda Richardson later in life. Their story adds another emotional dimension to the film, showing how a demanding artistic life can affect love, family, and personal relationships. And then comes the music. This is where The Yellow Tie truly begins to soar. The second half reportedly becomes much more powerful as the musical performances take center stage. Watching Sergiu conduct isn't presented merely as a technical exercise. His movements, expressions, intensity, and complete physical commitment make the performances feel almost like a battle between the conductor and the music itself. Ben Schnetzer especially deserves credit here. His conducting movements feel carefully studied, giving the character authenticity rather than making him look like an actor simply pretending to conduct. And once the orchestra starts playing, the movie transforms. The atmosphere becomes bigger, the emotion becomes deeper, and suddenly you understand why Sergiu was willing to sacrifice so much for music. But the yellow tie isn't only interested in his success, it also explores failure, rejection, isolation, prejudice, and the price of refusing to compromise. Sergiu's rise to prominence is not presented as a simple fairy tale where talent automatically leads to success. His path is filled with obstacles, setbacks, and difficult choices. That's what makes his eventual achievements feel so satisfying, because this isn't a story about someone who was simply lucky enough to become famous. It's about someone who kept moving forward when almost everything told him to stop. The movie's emotional climax is particularly meaningful when the older Sergiu looks through a gift from his father. Without giving away too much, the moment carries an enormous emotional weight because it reveals something about their relationship that had remained hidden beneath years of distance and misunderstanding. And honestly, moments like this can hit surprisingly hard, because the yellow tie ultimately asks a very simple question. What happens when the person whose approval you wanted your entire life finally shows you that they understood you? That emotional thread gives the movie something beyond its historical and musical importance. It gives it a heart. Visually, the film also appears to embrace a grand cinematic approach, taking audiences across different periods and locations while following Celibidache's extraordinary 7-decade journey. From Romania to wartime Europe and eventually onto the world's greatest musical stages, the scale of his life provides plenty of opportunities for spectacular filmmaking. But beneath all that spectacle is a very personal story. A boy with a dream, a young man running away from home, an artist fighting against convention, a conductor searching for perfection, and finally an older man looking back at everything he sacrificed along the way. The supporting cast also adds weight to the story, with Anton Lesser, Charlie Rowe, Tamsin Merchant, Olivia Popica, Alexandru Dunaev, Charles Nishikawa, and Angelo Bobak appearing in important roles. With a reported runtime of around 145 minutes, The Yellow Tie is clearly aiming to tell a substantial story rather than rushing through Celibidache's life. And that may be exactly what this subject needs, because Sergiu Celibidache wasn't an ordinary artist. He was controversial, he was demanding, he was sometimes difficult to understand, but above all, he was uncompromising in his pursuit of what he believed music should be. And that's what makes his story so fascinating. Whether you're a fan of classical music or someone who knows absolutely nothing about conductors, there is something universal here: the struggle to follow your dream when the world tells you that you're wrong. The Yellow Tie looks like the kind of film made with genuine passion rather than simply manufactured as another commercial biopic. It's about music, yes, but it's also about family, about identity, about rejection, about obsession, and about the extraordinary cost of becoming who you were always meant to be. The Yellow Tie is scheduled to release on October 9, 2026, with a runtime of approximately 145 minutes. So, if you're looking for a biographical drama with powerful performances, emotional family conflicts, breathtaking music, and the larger-than-life story of a truly unconventional artist, The Yellow Tie is definitely a movie you should keep on your radar. And if you're a fan of John Malkovich, Ben Schnetzer, classical music, inspiring true stories, or emotionally driven biographical films, this one could be a very interesting watch. For me, the most exciting thing about The Yellow Tie is that it doesn't appear to be asking us to simply admire Sergiu Celibidache. It wants us to understand him. And sometimes, understanding a complicated person is far more powerful than simply calling them a genius. So, what do you think about The Yellow Tie? Are you interested in watching Sergiu Celibidache's extraordinary story on the big screen? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to CheezeDrama for more upcoming movie updates, reviews, stories, and exciting cinema content. Until next time, keep watching, keep exploring, and keep discovering great stories.